I'm so glad that this popped into our rundown right before we got into the show. But is Black Twitter the new Green Book?
Yeah, so I put this in the story because a lot of people assume, rightly or wrongly, that Black Twitter is one, they're questioning, is it a thing? Number one. Number two, then
Yes.
what? Number two, what is it useful for? What do they use? How do you use it? How do you get access? Is there some sort of gatekeepers? Is there some special code? Do you got to know some? Go ahead.
Before you go too far into the story, why don't you tell folks what Black Twitter is? Because Black Twitter is absolutely a thing.
Right.
But we may have some listeners who may not know what Black Twitter is.
Well, and it's basically just a subset, a microcosm of Twitter, but it caters to, or not even caters to, there is a community of people who use Twitter a certain way. We share, they share, well, I'll say we share cultural conversations, things that are specific to us, whether it be whatever's talking about in the news, whatever's just talking about in life in general. There is a community, there is a language, there is a lingo, there is a community of people who use Twitter a certain way, i.e. is what we call it Black Twitter. Again, there's no leaders, there's no org chart, there's none of that,
No president of Black Twitter.
Right. But it is a state, almost like hip hop. You know it when you see it, right?
Right. If you know, you know.
Exactly. So, but getting into the story, a lot of people who, whether on the outside or people on the inside, they use it for, you think traditionally it's, people sharing funny memes or people talking about just general, pop culture references,
like
things of that nature.
When a reality TV show is on,
right?
There'll be
the
a
top,
whole lot of chatter around,
right.
That.
At the top of the show, I was talking about the versus thing. That's something absolutely you would play-by-play conversation.
It was probably on fire.
Exactly.
It was scrolling so fast you couldn't even read the comments. It was going so fast when that fight.
Right. But a story. A study done by this young lady's name is Shamika Klassen. She's a doctoral student at Colorado University, Boulder. Conducted a study between April and May of 2020, analyzing over 75,000 tweets and interviewing 18 Black Twitter users. And basically from this study, she compares the findings to serving a similar purpose as the Green Book. Now, for those who don't know, I'd say back in Jim Crow, post-slavery, there was a lot of places that Black people couldn't go. There's things we couldn't do. You had to be, there were some areas, call them sundown towns, to where you could not be in those certain areas, to where Black folks did not feel safe. So this Green Book was kind of like a map or atlas that let people know, Black folks know, where they could go, where they could lodge, where they could eat, where they can entertain themselves and feel safe. And don't have to worry about, any sort of retribution, any sort of, just a safe space when they traveled throughout the South and, up the East Coast, without feeling, getting in trouble or having any issues. Right. So this study kind of discovered the platform wasn't being utilized solely to share memes, but also to request safe suggestions for lodgings, places to eat without being side-eyed, and which professionals to book in which areas. So fast forward that Green Book concept to now on Twitter, specifically Black Twitter, a lot of people are starting to use Black Twitter, and say, hey, where can I go to where I can be around people who look and feel and act and talk like me. Now, we're not necessarily, they're not using to say, okay, well, I don't want to get, I don't want to go to where I'm not feel safe. But at the same time, there's a lot of stuff that's happened recently to where when Black people start to congregate, that's where the whole Karen thing came from, to where people are starting to call the police. They're getting in their business, and I think as a result of some of those things that came up in the past 2 or 3 years, people are starting to use Twitter and say, hey, where can I go to where I can eat and I can have a good time without somebody possibly bothering us, calling the police because they think we don't fit. So instead of fighting all that, they're using Twitter as this new age green book. So I just thought that was cool, that they're actually, people are using Twitter, specifically Black Twitter, something more than just sharing funny memes.
I would go so far as to say though that most social platforms get, well, I won't say most, but I know Facebook also in particular, because they have that specific feature where you can ask for recommendations. So I've seen a lot of people on Facebook too, like asking for a hairdresser. Anybody know a good hairdresser in the area, or whatever. So I think that is one of the good things that comes out of these social platforms, is that it does allow us to connect as a community and, look out for each other, because it's hard out here for Black folks these days. And, the more we can just give each other a little tidbit of advice to say, you know what, you might want to steer clear of that place, even if it's just on some, they don't make the best food, so don't eat there and don't waste your money. You know what I mean? It may not even need to necessarily be a safety issue, but just a community issue. Like, I'm looking out for my peoples. I love that it can be a vehicle for that.
I personally, now this wasn't on Twitter, it was on Facebook, but I used to travel a lot, and there would be times when I would have to travel with very, very short notice. And back in the day, Terrance, you might remember when I was wearing my my hair skin tight, so I would have to get a cut every week, and if you missed a cut, you would be looking pretty scraggly. So they're depending on what business or what company I was going to, there just may not be the person I can say, hey, where can I go get a cut, a good cut, because you can't just go to like Supercuts all the time. You just can't do that.
Nah.
So
you can't go to Supercuts none of the times.
But yeah, that is probably true. But I distinctly remember, it's like, there really is nobody here that I'm working with that I'm going to ask. Let me go to Twitter, let me go to Facebook and say, hey, I'm here. Where can I go and get a good cut, and give me specific directions on how to get there. And so yeah, this is a thing. I never thought about it, but yeah, I've actually done this, and it's probably a good thing, because people just feel comfortable sometimes being where they're comfortable. I know if I was getting a Airbnb, I'm going to look up and say, hey, is it commonplace that folks who look like me get the police called on them for actually existing in the place that you rent? Because that's the thing with Airbnb. It has happened on more than one occasion. It's happened on many occasions, to where you literally are just renting a spot, and the spot's in the wrong place, and neighbors think you're breaking into the place,
right?
Because you're actually typing in the number on the code to get the key. So yeah, this is an interesting way that I've actually done and just never thought about. Oh yeah, this is kind of like a green book. It actually is. And
just FYI, because I thought I remembered that somebody had actually put out a new version of the green book, like an actual physical version, and Martinique Lewis, who was the creative lead for No Madness Travel. I remember, I think I still follow that Instagram handle, but she put out the ABC Travel Green Book last year. On August 25th, it came out. So there is a green book on sale, but you can always just pop on over to Black Twitter.